I remember the exact moment I realized my world had tilted completely sideways. My name is Martha Blake, and I'm 63. I've lived in the same Connecticut neighborhood for decades, raising my son Timothy here with my late husband, Robert. Life had its challenges, of course, but I never imagined that the people I loved most could turn against me when I was most vulnerable. Just last week, I had been rushed to the hospital with severe abdominal pain, the kind of pain that makes your body feel like it's being twisted from the inside. I remember struggling to dial Timothy's number, my fingers trembling and sticky with sweat, and the sirens wailing around me. And all I could think about was how he would answer, how he would help me. But he didn't. He never did. When I woke from surgery 3 days later, groggy and disoriented, my first thought was him. Did he come? Did he even know I was awake? There were no missed calls, no messages, nothing. For 4 days, I tried calling him, leaving messages that ranged from desperate to confused to angry. Every single one went unanswered. And when the nurse finally asked if I wanted to contact him through the hospital phone, it hit me he had abandoned me in my hour of greatest need. I was discharged, my body weak and still sore from surgery, but my mind racing. I told myself I would rely on a taxi instead of him, that I would manage. I tried to brace myself for what I'd find when I got home, though in truth, I had no idea what was waiting for me. As the car turned onto Maple Street, I saw it, the sold sign planted firmly in my front yard, the stack of cardboard boxes along the porch, my life packed up as if I were just another stranger being evicted from my own home. My heart sank, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I clutched the railing, feeling the familiar stabbing pain in my abdomen, but it was nothing compared to the emptiness tearing through my chest. Timothy and his wife, Jessica, had sold the house I had built with Robert, the house where I had raised Timothy, without even telling me. A note, brief and cold, sat atop one of the boxes. Handle it. Those 2 words, simple as they were, carried the weight of betrayal, the kind that doesn't fade. I remembered the Sunday afternoons spent in that living room with Robert, baking cookies with Timothy in the kitchen, celebrating Christmas mornings filled with laughter and love. All of it seemed to have vanished in the blink of an eye. I felt shock, disbelief, and an anger that burned hotter than any fever. And yet, even in that moment, a quiet thought flickered through my mind. I will not let this define me. There must be a way forward. Somehow, I would reclaim control over my life, my home, my sense of self. Have you ever felt completely abandoned by someone you trusted most? It's a strange, hollow kind of loneliness, the kind that forces you to confront yourself. I sat there for a moment on the porch, leaning against the railing, the boxes surrounding me like silent witnesses. And I promised myself that whatever came next, I would find a way not just to survive, but to rise above it. The shock of that first sight would fade, but it had lit a fire inside me. And as I closed the gate and carried my hospital bag inside, I realized that this was the beginning, not the end of a journey I never expected to take. Lying in that hospital bed, I felt smaller than I ever had in my life. The pain in my abdomen was sharp and relentless, but even more unbearable was the silence from the people I loved most. I kept thinking about Timothy, how I had always counted on him after Robert passed away. He had been my rock, my companion, and now I was reaching for him in the most desperate moment of my life and finding nothing. No concern, no calls, no messages. It was as if I had disappeared entirely while I fought just to stay alive. I tried to convince myself that maybe he was busy, that he would come by in the morning, but deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't forgetfulness or oversight. It was a choice. Each unanswered call, each voicemail left hanging, carved a little deeper into my heart. I remembered times I had been there for him through illnesses, heartbreaks, school projects, and celebrations. I had held his hand, wiped his tears, and celebrated every milestone as if my life depended on it. And yet, when it mattered most, he had chosen not to show up. The nurses and doctors were kind, efficient, doing their best to comfort me, but no one could replace the absence of a child who should have been there. I thought about the calls I left, how they started with worry, turned to confusion, and eventually became tinged with frustration and anger. And with each passing day, that frustration grew, mixing with an ache I couldn't heal with medicine. It was a betrayal that felt physical, like a twisting of the gut far beyond what surgery had inflicted. I reflected on how different life had been just a few years ago. Robert had been here to lean on. Timothy had been the dutiful son, and we had all shared a rhythm, a pattern of trust. That trust had crumbled overnight. I wondered if Timothy even realized the depth of what he had done, or if he saw me only as a burden, a parent too old and fragile to understand or manage my own life. It was a bitter pill, feeling the weight of abandonment from the person I had poured so much love into. And yet, even in that despair, a small voice inside me refused to give in. I reminded myself that I had survived life's storms before, that I had the strength to survive this one too. I couldn't control Timothy's choices, but I could control my own. I began thinking about what I would do when I got home, how I would face the mess that awaited me, and how I could reclaim some sense of agency. This betrayal, sharp and raw as it was, might be the catalyst that forced me to finally take control of my life. The hospital room, once filled with fear and pain, became a space for quiet determination. I promised myself that when I walked out of those doors, I would confront the reality that awaited me not as a victim, but as a woman who still had the power to shape her destiny. And I held on to that thought as the day of my discharge drew near, preparing for whatever awaited me at home. The drive home felt longer than usual, every stoplight stretching my anxiety taut. My body was weak from surgery, every movement reminding me that I was still recovering. But it wasn't the incision that weighed on me most. It was the dread of what awaited at the house I had called home for decades. As the taxi turned onto Maple Street, I froze. The modest ranch where Timothy and I had grown up, where Robert and I had built our life together, no longer felt like mine. There, planted firmly in the front yard, was a bright red sold sign. My heart stopped, a sinking heaviness settling deep in my chest. I tried to breathe, to make sense of it, but the sight of the cardboard boxes stacked neatly on the porch sent a shockwave through me. My belongings, clothes, photos, kitchenware, pieces of a lifetime were packed up, left for me to handle. I remembered the countless Sunday afternoons spent in that living room with Robert, teaching Timothy to bake cookies in that very kitchen, celebrating Christmas mornings filled with laughter. Now, those memories seemed trapped behind the walls I no longer owned. I thought of the note from Timothy and Jessica, cold and practical, instructing me to manage it myself, handle it. Just those 2 words, simple as they were, felt like a knife twisting in my heart. I had always imagined that Timothy would be the son who would have my back, who would step up when life knocked me down. But they had made a choice, and in that moment, it was clear I was alone. Each step toward the porch was a battle against both my physical pain and the crushing weight of betrayal. I could feel my hands trembling, my mind racing with confusion and disbelief. How could the person I had raised, loved, and supported act so coldly? How could they dismantle the life I had built while I was fighting for my life in a hospital bed? I paused, letting my hand rest on the railing, trying to steady my breath. The living room inside was stripped bare, furniture gone, keepsakes gone. The mattress left on the floor as a reminder of the home I had once filled with warmth and laughter. And yet, amid the shock and heartbreak, a flicker of clarity emerged. I realized that if I wanted to reclaim any part of myself, I had to act. This was no longer just a house, it was a symbol of control and choice. I needed to remind myself that while Timothy and Jessica could take a building, they could not take the strength I had nurtured through the years. This pain, sharp and raw as it was, could either define me or propel me forward. I sat on the mattress for a long moment, letting the weight of loss settle around me. And as I looked at those empty walls, I promised myself that I would find a way not just to survive, but to rise, to reclaim my dignity, and to chart the course of my life on my own terms. Sitting on the edge of that bare mattress, I let myself breathe, even as the sting of betrayal throbbed in my chest. I realized that for all the shock and anger, I still had something they could never take: my mind, my experience, and the choices I could make. Timothy and Jessica had tried to rewrite my life without my consent, but I still had the power to reclaim control, even if it meant stepping into unknown territory. I began thinking about what I could do, focusing first on the practical. There was Eleanor, my oldest friend, a steady presence who had always reminded me of my strength. If anyone could help me regroup, it was her. I imagined calling her, explaining everything, and feeling her unshakable support wrap around me. Then there was Walter, my financial advisor, someone who had guided me for over a decade. He knew about the investments Robert and I had carefully built, the life insurance funds, and the accounts that Timothy thought he understood, but didn't. I could turn to him, assess my options, and protect what was mine. As I reflected, I thought about the years I had spent raising Timothy, the love and patience I had poured into him, and the sacrifices I had made. And yet, I realized that love alone didn't guarantee respect or fairness. I had to act, not out of spite, but out of necessity. I couldn't let the house sale or their coldness dictate my future. For the first time in days, a sense of calm determination settled over me. I could survive this. I could navigate the legal and financial complexities ahead. I could reclaim my autonomy and rebuild my life on my terms. And then, another thought surfaced, one that made my heart quicken with both fear and excitement. This was an opportunity, perhaps the first in years, to create a life that reflected my choices rather than theirs. I could move somewhere new, start fresh, and invest in myself the way I had invested in my family for decades. I could create boundaries, establish control, and still honor the love I had for Timothy. But on my terms, I wondered if he would ever understand the depth of what he had done. But that didn't matter as much as I thought. What mattered was my next step, the actions I would take to protect my well-being. my finances, and my peace of mind. I promised myself I would not rush, but I would act decisively. And as I planned those first calls to Eleanor and Walter, a quiet clarity emerged. Betrayal had exposed a challenge, but it had also illuminated my own strength. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the faint but undeniable spark of hope. The first step was reaching out to Eleanor. I remembered her voice, calm and unwavering, the kind of friend who always cut through panic with practical wisdom. I told her everything: the hospital stay, the silence from Timothy, the sold sign, the boxes stacked on my porch. She didn't hesitate or question my judgment. She simply offered a place to stay, a stable ground from which I could begin to sort through the chaos. Just knowing someone had my back was a balm for the rawness in my chest. Next, I contacted Walter. I needed clarity, numbers, and strategy. As I poured out the story of what had happened, I could feel him mapping a plan in his mind, assessing the assets, the legal angles, and the possibilities. He reminded me that Timothy and Jessica might have thought they knew the extent of our savings and investments, but the reality was different. The funds from Robert's life insurance, carefully invested and managed over the years, had grown. I wasn't wealthy by New York standards, but I was secure enough to make choices for myself, real choices, ones no one could take from me. With Eleanor's help, I began packing what I truly needed, leaving the rest behind, taking small steps that felt empowering after weeks of helplessness. Each suitcase I carried to her car was a symbol of reclaiming control, a tangible act of self-preservation. I imagined the life ahead, the freedom of a new place, a fresh environment where I could rebuild without the shadow of betrayal looming over me. And then came the television segment, a complete surprise that shifted the power dynamic entirely. Sharing my story about resilience and financial independence on national TV made Timothy and Jessica realize they had misjudged me. Suddenly, 99 missed calls flooded my phone, and I felt a quiet satisfaction validation. Yes, but also a realization that I had agency they hadn't anticipated. The shock of being powerless had given way to the thrill of realizing just how much strength I carried within me. I began exploring options for relocation, researching a small guest house in Florida offered by Eleanor's cousin. The idea of warmth, sunshine, and a place where I could heal physically and emotionally became a beacon. I imagined mornings on the patio with coffee, evenings watching the sun dip below the horizon, and a sense of self that was no longer defined by a home I had lost or by the actions of people I loved but could not rely on. Through these actions, securing finances, planning a move, leaning on true friends, I started to rebuild the foundation of my life. Each step was deliberate, measured, and filled with the quiet pride of a woman reclaiming what was hers, not just in property, but in dignity, confidence, and hope. The betrayal had lit a fire, and I was determined to turn it into a life that reflected my strength and independence. Sitting across from Timothy in that small seaside cafe, I felt a mix of tension and cautious curiosity. Seeing him after a year of silence was strange, like meeting a stranger who carried the echoes of a familiar voice. I reflected on all the moments we had shared, the trust I had placed in him, and the shock of his absence when I needed him most. It was hard to separate the son I had raised from the one who had sold my home without a second thought. I reminded myself that this meeting wasn't about anger alone. It was about reclaiming my power. As I observed him, I thought about the choices I had made since discovering the betrayal, how I had secured my finances, sought legal advice, and begun rebuilding my life in Florida. I realized that I had entered this conversation not as a helpless mother, but as a woman who had regained control. My goal wasn't to shame Timothy, but to assert boundaries that preserved my dignity. I considered how easily trust can be broken, and how difficult it is to rebuild. The sale of the house while I was incapacitated had been a shock, a profound violation. I reflected on the legal and financial leverage I now held, the investments Timothy hadn't known existed, and the power of information and preparation. I had learned the hard way that love alone does not ensure fairness. Respect had to be demanded, and accountability required action. I thought about the silence between us during the first moments of the meeting, the careful observation, and the subtle shifts in his posture. It made me realize that while emotions were high, the foundation of our interaction had to be honesty tempered with patience. I could feel the anger bubbling under the surface, but I focused on clarity and composure, knowing that my response now would define the relationship's future, not the betrayal itself. The thought that kept returning to me was this power isn't about revenge, it's about choice. I could choose to engage, to forgive gradually, or to step back completely. I could let this meeting open a path toward understanding, but only on my terms. That realization steadied me. I wasn't there to argue endlessly or to relive every hurt. I was there to establish my terms, my expectations, and my boundaries. As the conversation continued in my mind, I considered how I would protect my autonomy moving forward. I could acknowledge Timothy's remorse, recognize his perspective, but also maintain control over my life. This meeting was a pivotal moment, not a resolution, but a declaration. I was no longer simply Martha Blake, the mother of a son who had betrayed me. I was a woman defining her future, and I intended to do so with deliberate thought, unwavering strength, and a heart that refused to be diminished. In the weeks that followed, I began to see the fruits of careful planning and quiet determination. I focused on securing my finances first, moving investments into accounts that only I could access, and updating my will to reflect my intentions clearly. With the guidance of my attorney, I explored the legal avenues available to contest the house sale, knowing that while Timothy's name on the deed complicated matters, there were protections for situations like mine. I realized that empowerment isn't just emotional, it's practical. Every step I took reinforced my control and slowly replaced the lingering fear of betrayal with a quiet confidence. Moving to Florida with Eleanor's support was both liberating and healing. The small guest house, surrounded by sunlight and greenery, became my sanctuary. Mornings began with coffee on the patio, watching lizards scurry across the garden wall, feeling the warmth of the sun seep into my bones. Afternoons were spent exploring the town, visiting local museums, walking along the public beach with its spectacular sunsets, or joining Marge for water aerobics at the community pool. Each day was a reminder that life could be gentle and joyful again, even after such deep hurt. As I settled into this new life, I began receiving messages from Timothy, calls, texts, and voicemails, each one a mix of concern and frustration. For a month, I ignored them all. It wasn't out of cruelty, but necessity. I needed to reclaim my peace and build a life where I wasn't defined by the betrayal of my son. Slowly, the panic, fear, and resentment that had occupied my thoughts began to give way to deliberate action. I was not just surviving, I was thriving. Then came the unexpected opportunity to share my story on national television. I had been approached to discuss financial independence for women over 60, highlighting how a sudden crisis could become a turning point. Appearing on camera forced me to recognize how far I had come from a woman betrayed and left powerless to someone who had reclaimed agency over her life and finances. The exposure also triggered Timothy's awareness of my actual financial situation, prompting him to reach out repeatedly, which in turn validated the choices I had made in silence. Even as I began tentative steps toward reconnecting, I knew that boundaries were essential. Meeting Timothy for coffee or a casual conversation was about exploring the possibility of rebuilding trust, not erasing the past. I reflected on the lessons this experience had taught me. Love does not excuse betrayal, and forgiveness must never come at the cost of self-respect. I realized that I could acknowledge his remorse while maintaining control over my life, setting limits that protected my heart and my future. The process of reclaiming my life transformed every aspect of my existence, my confidence, my independence, and my sense of self-worth. I found satisfaction in small victories, securing my finances, living on my own terms, establishing new routines, and savoring moments of peace that had seemed impossible just months earlier. It became clear that empowerment is not an event, but a journey, built step by step through deliberate choices and unwavering determination. As I watched the sun dip below the horizon one evening, I felt an unexpected lightness in my chest. The betrayal had left scars, yes, but it had also revealed the depth of my resilience. I had been forced to confront uncertainty, loss, and fear, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace life on my own terms. In that quiet, golden light, I knew I was not just a survivor. I was a woman who had reclaimed her power, dignity, and joy. Sitting on my patio in Naples, Florida, I often pause to reflect on the journey that brought me here. A year ago, I had been betrayed in the most personal way imaginable. I had woken from surgery to find my son had sold the house I had shared with my late husband, packed my belongings into boxes, and left me to face the world alone. At the time, I felt shock, grief, and anger in equal measures. I questioned everything: the trust I had placed in Timothy, the fairness of life, and even my own strength. But looking back now, I realize those painful moments were the catalyst for a transformation I never anticipated. Over the months, I rebuilt my life from the ground up. I secured my finances, moved investments into accounts I controlled, and established legal protections to ensure my autonomy could not be undermined again. I leaned on Eleanor and Walter, not because I needed rescuing, but because even the strongest among us benefit from support and wisdom when navigating challenges. I learned that empowerment is not just about financial security, it is about the courage to take control of your life, even when those you love disappoint you most. Florida became more than a new home. It became a sanctuary. I filled my days with routines that nourished my body and spirit: morning coffee on the patio, strolls along the beach, afternoons exploring museums, joining water aerobics with Marge, and evenings watching the sun dip below the horizon. Every step, every new experience, reminded me that life could be gentle, vibrant, and filled with choice again. And while Timothy remained a complicated presence, I discovered that boundaries and self-respect are essential for preserving peace, even with family. Sharing my story on national television was another turning point. It revealed not only my financial independence, but also the resilience I had cultivated in silence. The flood of missed calls and messages from Timothy and Jessica after that broadcast did not unsettle me as it once might have. Instead, I understood that my life, my choices, and my strength could no longer be dictated by anyone else. I had built a foundation that allowed me to step forward with confidence and clarity. Reflecting now, I see that betrayal, loss, and fear can sometimes lead to profound self-discovery. I learned to trust myself, to protect my dignity, and to create a life that reflects my values and desires. The journey was neither simple nor painless, but it was necessary. And through it all, I have come to understand that home is not just a place, it is a state of being, defined by safety, love, and self-respect. If my story resonates with you, I hope it inspires you to consider the ways in which you can reclaim your power, establish boundaries, and embrace the life you deserve. Life is unpredictable, and betrayal can happen, but within each of us lies the strength to rise, rebuild, and thrive. Please share your experiences in the comments, and if my journey speaks to you, consider liking and subscribing so we can continue exploring these stories of resilience and empowerment together.